walking and have to book through the forest to get there and even get 20 minutes to the show. It meant the world, and we had 6 hours of Star Wars, and that's all we had to do our imagination. This showed up, and all of a sudden they gave us something, you guys gave something every day, and it was unbelievable. What was it like entering that and working in that process of churning out these amazing stories and great animated shows? Unlike no cartoon had ever done that before.
Yeah. Well, it's what I find interesting about the series is that at the time there had been a lot of unemployment in the Los Angeles animation scene because we had a strike in '82 and a lot of work was going out of town, and then this project popped up where suddenly they were hiring everybody to work on this TV series about this warrior, this superhero guy. And it was interesting because we were doing the shows and we were having a good time doing it. And I remember one time I was watching. Does anybody remember there was an old show called Moonlighting? Years ago, yeah. And it was a young guy named Bruce Willis was in it. And there's one episode where Bruce Willis is hanging out with his friends at a bar, and they start singing the theme from Top Cat. They all start going like, "Oh, close friends get to call TC," all that kind of thing. And then the next day, I remember going into the storyboard department and going, "Hey guys, we're making memories for kids. Like, this is real. Like, this is actually, it's going to stick with people." And it's amazing that of all the series that, all the different shows that we've all worked on over the years, this one has staying. We're always asked to conventions, and the fans are so loyal to this one. It's amazing. So, Larry, you want to jump in? Or Brooke?
Is this on?
Yeah.
Thank goodness, because my voice isn't. Yeah, I wrote what you just saw. And 14 I was like, and it was astounding because we did 65 episodes a year. So it was just, it totally, and it was total fun. It was total fun writing these things and doing, we were working like hell. And at 30 years later, and starting at 40, it's still popular. I don't know why. I think it's the stories and the wonderful actors we had, and just that it appealed to so many kids, because kids are powerless, and for 25 minutes a day, they feel powerful. They are the power. People have told me that I changed their lives. Someone told me once, I said, suicide. He said, I decided to watch Secret of the Sword instead. I said, okay. I said, but don't do that again. So, yeah, let's...
All right, I can jump in there if you'd like. Yeah, basically, this is the first time I've watched He-Man since we wrote it, and it was great, very fun and very entertaining. Michael Reeves and I were writing most of the episodes of Black Star, which is another Filmation show, in a very similar vein to He-Man, and then we started getting the series 5 on He-Man, and so on. This is, I think, before the toys were even out. And but when you were talking about the power of the show, we were all really young guys. I was in my 20s when I was writing this show, and recently, and I went on to write for a lot of other shows, Next Gen and DS9 and Babylon 5 and Sliders and on. And you don't know the impact what you've done has had. And recently someone wrote me, and they asked, they were an adult now, of course, and they asked if they could send me a couple of screen grabs from one of my episodes. It was Reign of the Monster. And I said, sure. And he sent me the screen grabs, and he included a letter. And when he was a kid, his dad went to a Halloween party and was murdered. And he told me that He-Man was what got him through his childhood, that was something he could hold on to. And I was married, he has a family of his own, and he's got a life. And I had no idea that something that we had worked on, something we'd done, would be something one little boy could hold on to that would get him through life and get him to build a life. And so you never know the power of what you're doing. But watching He-Man, I think, people want heroes in the world. They want heroes in their lives. They want someone they can aspire to be. And I think, we might have thought some of those lessons were corny at the time, those little morals at the end. But I think, well, yes, but I think they're also meaningful because I think they're also truthful. And I think there's a when he says I have the power, there is a power to the show, and I think there's a truth to the show. And I think that's one of the reasons why it's lasted.
Just before I was coming here, I was talking to a neighbor, and I told her what I was coming to, and my neighbor's name is Tila. And it turned out she was named for Tila on He-Man. So it obviously had a big effect on her mom and dad. And now she's a mom and is going to get her kids to watch these shows on DVD.
Does she have a brother named Brooks?
Oh, no. But watching your episode with the tree, well, one of the first things, I was writing a She-Ra, which was one of my first, I didn't write, I wrote on the reboot of He-Man, but I wrote on the original She-Ra. And in that first episode, this guy comes from outer space and he's really strong and they're having kind of a test of strength. And I had She-Ra rip up a tree and they said, no, you can't do that. A tree is a living thing. And now I understand where that came from.
That came from me.
And I would like to ask to join us Skeletor and She-Ra, ladies and gentlemen, Alan Oppenheimer, Melendy, Britt.
Together again.
It's called He-Man, the Masters of the Universe, but I think the star of the show isn't, in fact, He-Man, but one of the greatest characters ever created for animation of all time, and that is, of course, Skeletor, who is funnier than any comedian you see, and if someone were to show you a picture of Skeletor, most of them would have done the voice that you saw for Demon Seed, an evil kind of voice. That voice is unbelievable. Where did it come from that you matched that with that yellow skull?
Okay. Well, I think the first episode I probably did it as the villain. I always try to look for comedy in the worst situation. And so I lined it up. But why did I go nasal? People have asked me. Well, he has a bony head. So I figured he had to have kind of a voice like that to come out of there. I have no idea why I laughed. Of course, that's a corruption of which you usually see a villain do. So, but anytime I can find comedy in tragedy, I go for it. And I guess I tossed off an insult at one time, and Lou and Norm Press said, oh, would you keep that in? So they began to write, thank you very much, some insults, and a lot of my insults were never printed, of course. They're down there somewhere.
And can you talk about, as writers and creating that character, because it hadn't been done before, and it really, I don't think to that extent, where he relishes, and you see in Demon Seed, he relishes playing the part of being evil. Like, he doesn't get why everyone else doesn't do this, because it's the best, and he's surrounded by a bunch of idiots that can't accomplish what he's trying to do. Can you talk about just bringing that character? Because I think it's really the iconic, because if you buy a shirt, if you buy anything, Skeletor is usually the guy that's on it.
I think I was going to throw in that I storyboarded a lot of Evil Seed, and I animated Evil Seed when he's dying, well, mostly Evil Seed scenes. And what I always liked about that script, or always liked about that show, was how Skeletor and He-Man had to work together, and Skeletor was so reluctant, and it was funny. Like, I loved the little part of when his lair is being overwhelmed, and he's suddenly trying to call back He-Man. It's like, oh, He-Man! Very funny.
He didn't have a cell phone.
Larry, can you talk about writing for Skeletor?
Oh, Skeletor was, we always thought of him, I think, as a comic opera villain. You know, yeah, that's, George Krasinski was on He-Man at one time. He gave him hold the mic. Can you hear me?
Yeah, hold on.
Okay. Yeah, you don't want to hear my voice. I can do only one voice, this is it. We always thought of him as humor. But I have to say there's another thing where after doing 65 episodes, right, we had something that was called the Skeletor syndrome, which is, He-Man was very not proactive. Skeletor was proactive, totally. And I actually played Skeletor for the Evil at some points, because He-Man doesn't act until Skeletor acts.
Oh, I didn't know that.
So, and then when I'm the one who developed She-Ra into a show. I was given that honor. And I was more than happy to learn this take on She-Ra. In fact, I was watching an old convention. I was watching you and Alan at the He-Man conventions out in Torrance, and you were saying that you're totally different from Adora when you're She-Ra, and vice versa. Now my family thinks I named She-Ra after my niece, but I didn't. She's She-Ra. We were going to call She-Ra Hera. And suddenly the lawyers came up and said, there's a copyright on that. I said, how do you copyright like Greek myth? There's no copyright on Greek myth, So I said, well, I tried to float like, She-Ra and the Mistress of the Universe, but we never got anywhere with that. I said, that probably won't work. So I was a big fan of, I was reading a book on Egyptian mythology at the time, and I came across Ra, which is an Egyptian term for God. So I said, She-Ra. We got He-Man, and we got She-Ra.
Perfect.
Yeah. The only problem was that they would never let you use your sword like a sword. You got to make it into a tennis paddle or a screwdriver
But I love that part of it.
See, that frustrated me.
Oh, my goodness.
But I think that shows she was very proactive. That was what I really loved about it. She said, let's go out and get these people who are, they're literally under occupation. And I called it the Great Rebellion after Star Wars. I stole that. Genius of steel. The hacksaw. So I like both shows. I wasn't around for all of She-Ra, which I got a better job. It was a better paid job. It was a better job in all purposes. Working for Lou Scheimer, you didn't get paid great. That's true. There were some limitations in the animation, and that's true. You couldn't do really big set pieces. That was true. But it was the best time.
You couldn't show people going on a horse.
Right, that would take, too much money and time, But Lou treated everybody that he worked with like a family, and we all became a family. He's a car.
Melendy, can we talk about, because you were done Batgirl and the Adventures of Batman before, and then you came into She-Ra after He-Man was a mega force. What was it like getting back with the Filmation gang?
I had worked for them before, and when this one came up, it was a lot more complicated or intensive than the others. With the others, we just auditioned. With this one, I did an audition, and then I was called in and spoke with Lou. And I could see the passion and the love he had behind this series. And we discussed how how his character was going to be, what she was going to be, what she was going to do, and what she represented. And it made everything a lot more large and epic to me than any other animation thing that I've done. And my gosh, to be the Princess of Power, that was just like, okay, I'll try. And he was just the best, as everyone knows. And he gave you, if he believed in you, you knew you could do it. That was what was really important about that. But I loved her character. I really, really did. And I felt really blessed to have been chosen for it.
And if you stick around for Toy Masters, which please do, Blue says a lot of great things in that film, so please stick around for that. It's a very moving. I think as watching it, I think one of the keys to Filmation, that I love Star Trek and I love this, is that it's impressionistic. So some people sometimes say that the animation isn't, more expensive enough. But I think that enabled the stories to be more complicated. It enabled the backgrounds to be some of the most surreal, awesome, beautiful backgrounds. It has epic storyboards, and it allows the voice actors to be big. And, you could go to a Best Buy and you turn it, welcome to Best Buy. And they would do something like that. Everyone's big and huge, and if it was animated unbelievably with a lot of money, you'd lose the voice acting to be that operatic. And I want to talk about a little bit of there's restrictions, but what was beautiful in those restrictions? What did you find?
Well, I know, like, I was storyboarding from the beginning of the series and animating as well, and we always had that the restrictions of basically, you can't do like full Disney animation or large quality, and so we had to use a certain amount of reuse, and we had stock scenes, all that stuff. And we had to have at least 35% stock and reuse in each show. And actually it became sort of like a puzzle or a game. It's like doing crosswords. It's like, how can we get, can we lift something from another show and put it in? And I remember we used to walk around the hallway, the storyboard artists, and going, hey, did anybody ever do Man-at-Arms getting in the Wind Raider and picking his nose? And like, oh yeah, I did that in show 17. Okay, great, give it, yeah, I'll take that. And it became like a game, like how many times, there was one by the end of the series when we did the greatest show on Eternia, which I heard the fans have labeled one of the worst shows ever done. So I'm very proud of that one. And, but it's the one where they go to the circus, and there's a stock, I think it's stock 16, of He-Man laughing where he goes. I tried to put it like 16 times into the show. I wanted it to be a run-on gag that every time something happened, He-Man would go. See, how many times can I get away with it before somebody throws something at me?
Well, in that regard, the scripts, when we were writing the scripts, they were very long because we had to break down every single shot. It was very different from how it is now. So, for instance, a half-hour script would be 55 pages, and you'd only have one movement allowed per shot. And you essentially you'd storyboard it in your mind before the storyboard artist drew it. So you would say, for instance, you might say, low angle, the Teal and He-Man, and you'd have a line of dialogue, then you'd go to close on He-Man and so forth. And so it'd be going through it. And my degree was in painting, sculpture, and graphic arts, and so I had a very strong visual imagination, and that allowed me to see it in my head. And I was always, looking at what the character designs were and the set designs were, and frequently I was in conversation with the storyboard artists to see what the visual vocabulary of the show was. And also, again, as you said, Filmation was renowned for utilizing stock shots. There on Black Star, which was, as I said, the show that came just before He-Man, there were these characters called the Trobbits, I think there were 7 of them, and they had one shot of the Trobbits running toward camera, and half of the Trobbits, every other Trobbit looked frightened, and the alternate ones looked happy, so you could have them running from a monster or running to a birthday cake, and they had that shot over and over and over again. But one thing I want to point out, and I'm sure all of you know this, nowadays with computers and all this stuff animated and so at hand would be the technology, these shows were made utterly by hand. This was, we would, at first we were typing them on typewriters, then we got K-Pro 2s and we'd be typing them on Mason computers, and then they were drawn by hand. So it was pencil, and I remember the storyboards, and those initial drawings, the creature drawings would be like blue pencil, and then, and then it was ink and paint, so they draw it and then put it on celluloid, and that's why they're selling cells now. So this really made by hand, and there was a lot of love in it, and a lot of us have enormous affection for what we were doing, and enthusiasm for what we were doing. So that really shows through.
And I think the fact that Filmation was the last studio that was actually animating in the United States.
Yes.
I mean, every other studio had taken the work overseas, but Filmation, through these economy measures, was able to animate here. And I had started, my first job at Filmation was actually way back on Star Trek, doing storyboards, and I remember the stock book. And by the time you got to the end of the season, you were basically a bookkeeper, rather than drawing. But but they did have a con, and as you were saying, you really storyboarded it out while writing. You wrote every shot, so when I talked about you couldn't show someone getting on a horse, that was literally, they'd run to the horse and then they'd be on the horse, but you wouldn't see them actually climbing on the horse because that would have been a lot of pencil mileage and animation. So lots of cheats like that.
I wanted to throw in just a quick little thing talking about She-Ra, but I directed my first couple of She-Ras, and yeah, it was a red night. It was a good one. And I remember that She-Ra always had that little tennis skirt, that small skirt, whatever, that little thing. And I remember they had a cleanup, head of the cleanup department, Dory Herrick, made it her goal in life to make sure that no matter what She-Ra did, jumping, wrestling, whatever, that damn little skirt never flipped up.
Yeah, it did. Yeah, it always stayed modest. So it didn't matter.
Static clean.
The voice records, were they at Filmation, or was there separate, was there in-house records, or how were they done? Was everyone together or individual? The records?
Yeah, we all, it was like a film thing. You would go in the morning, and we would all sit around a table and read the script, or we sometimes two, right? And then we'd have lunch, and then we'd record. Then it was great fun. It really was.
So the whole cast was there, and you guys rehearsed before? You would do it, or just read, or?
Well, when I worked there, we didn't always have a whole cast. Of course, I played 4 voices in it, so I was half the cast anyway. And I would talk to myself. I think Lou Scheimer's calling me. That's all. So pay no attention to this voice in my pocket. So a lot of actors will, if they're playing multiple voices, they'll do one voice all the way through, and then they'll go back and pick up the other voice all the way through. But I chose to talk to myself because then it was fresh in my head how I would answer. And so Skeletor and Merman were talking, and Skeletor would say, "Merman, get out of here!" "Oh, I don't want to get out of here, leave me alone." So I could answer in time, and I found that kind of helpful, and I'm sure Lou appreciated the time that we saved.
Wow, so you recorded as both characters linearly with...
Yes, and Cringer. And Man-at-Arms.
And Battle, were you Battle Cat as well?
Well, Battle Cat was just a roar, wasn't it?
Yeah.
They laid that in afterwards. Yeah. Your stock roar.
So what was it like working with Lou in the booth?
It was wonderful, just like Melendy said, it was wonderful. I mean, he was just so supportive, and he'd let you go. I don't remember Lou giving very much direction. I remember a lot of appreciation. And, oh yes, if you messed up, we'd go back over it again. But I don't think he gave any specific direction. John Irwin, who played He-Man, and I, and Linda Gary, and we were pretty decent actors, and we could pick up from each other what was called for. And sometimes we do it, and then we say, no, I got to do that again. Now, I also did Falcor in The Never-Ending Story. I'm only bringing that up to make a point about doing it over again. So I went to Munich. They had already made the film. And I really had to ADR the voice based on what the dragon was doing. So we did it on, like, let's say Wednesday, and we finished, and Wolfgang Peterson said, well, that's fine. Okay, good, thank you. I said, can I have a playback? And I looked at the playback and I said, Wolfgang, I'm going to do this again. Why? I said, because it has no heart. It's just as technical. So he said, okay. So I came back the next day and did what you see, where Falcor has feeling and heart and isn't just a technique of ADRing to it. So I think sometimes the director or producer wants to move along and say, that's fine. And I am a fairly good judge of what I can do a second time. Although I have done it a second time, and it stank, and we printed the first one.
You're also the voice of Rockbiter in that, correct?
What's that?
Rockbiter? You're also the voice of the
I
Rockbiter
did
in
the
that?
Rockbiter
Which is
and
one of the
the
most
Mark.
depressing moments.
And the narrator at the end, yeah.
Yeah.
Each time I was out the door, Wolfgang would say, "Oh, can you do the Rockbiter?" "Oh, one more, can you do the more?" "Oh, this is little narration at the end, would you do that?" He got a lot out of me for no money.
To show how we all worked with each other on other shows, and Alan, I worked on a primetime animated show called The Legend of Prince Valiant.
Oh, God,
And-
yes.
And Alan was Merlin, and just did a magnificent job. as
Merlin, yes. Yes. Ephraim Zimbalist used to say, "Oh, shut up, you little Billy." But I played Merlin the magician on Prince Valiant. Yes, that was wonderful.
I'm going to open up some questions.
I just want to throw in just one quickie thing, and just talking about the individual artists and all. But we had on the crew, we had a very large crew, and there were a lot of artists, animators from very young, you know, who later be important in like the later Disney films and other series, as well as some very old artists who were ending their careers. And I remember there was this old assistant named Jim Logan, and Jim had been working since the 40s. He worked on Popeye and you know, he worked on Casper, the Friendly Ghost, and a lot of shows. And this is sort of towards the end of his career. And I remember he would come into me with questions on some scenes. And he had worked on so many series, he couldn't get the names of the characters straight. So he used to make up his own names. So Merman he called Fishman, and Beastman he called Dogman. And Skeletor was Bone Man. So it's like, no, Tom, over here, here's this scene where Fishman is talking to Dog Man. Then they both go to see Bone Man. And I said, Jim, I want to work on that show too. That's good.
Right there.
There were some products in the Mattel line that supposedly were too risque to put on television. Can you talk about some of the script process with that and stuff?
When you, the ball bugs. I remember when you started writing the script, you got a toy catalog, basically, and the instruction, you don't have to use any of these, but we'd really like it if you could put in as many as you can. And we did.
That's this, yeah. We go down to Mattel. That was some fun when we went out to Mattel, and they had all these suits around the table, and they would say, "You have to do this." So they ordered a product that was a kind of a battering ram. It had a big ball on the end of like a thing that you just trigger it and it would batter down stuff. And they said, "Well, we're calling that the ball buster." And Bush stood up and said, "Gentlemen, read your contract." He says, "You have no control here, you know, and I'll be damned if, you know, if we're ever going to put on a show named for children, an item called the Ball Buster." We should talk after the Toy Masters one, I'm sure. I have some, I think I'm in that documentary. And yeah, we were always trying to subvert Mattel's regulations, and you know, a lot of times Mattel could shoot itself in the foot, which they did on the new He-Man. I don't know if any of you worked on that. I did too. And it had decent animation. It was a good show until the second season, at which the guy replaced it was a hit at first. And then they said, "Well, we want to sell Snake Man this year, so put all the Snake Men in every script." Now, I was not a story writer or a producer on that. I was a freelancer. I did the orange of Skeletor on the new one.
I did one with some sea monster.
No, they gave me big strips to do. I did where Orko first came, and it had the shot when he came, and it was taken from the Filmation. And they said, "Where did it go from there?" So they gave me a lot of things to do, and Mattel just said, replaced all the characters that were regulars at that point by kind of Snake Man, all the villains anyway, you know. And I was big on Evil. I always liked Evil. I love to use shoes today. So, you know, I said, that's going to ruin the whole script. They ruined my whole script. This was supposed to be like a backstory of Evil Dead. Like, I have to put Snake Man in it for He-Man to be up. You know, so it's not working the way it's supposed to be working. So that's just like, I'll say more at the Toy Master.
Okay.
Is there a panel at the Toy Master?
I believe there's been.
I'll probably be on that, and I'll say more.
And I'll have one thing in this regard.
Watch it.
Because all of us, the three writers on the panel, we've all worked on many, many shows, and many things of good fortune have to come into play at the same time for a show to be good, for it to work, and often it can be one guy with power can ruin it, you know. And so with He-Man, when we watched the original version of the show, and the fact that you're all here, and the fact that you love it, clearly that it was Lou Scheimer's love of the way of doing this, and the actors' love of the characters, and our love of that universe, and all of it coming together, and no one stepping in to wreck it. And the fascinating thing, of course, is, you know, many of us have been writing for the networks, and then this was a syndicated show financed by a toy company, and that was a very different model from what we were doing for CBS and NBC and ABC, because back then, there were only 3 networks, and in order to do an animated show that was outside the network's purview to find the money, it had to be financed by Mattel in this case, and so it's created a new, basically genre of animated children's television. But back then, it's not like now. You were reaching millions of people. Anytime you did any show, you were reaching a huge number of people. I also wrote the Twilight Zone Companion, and Twilight Zone was not a huge ratings hit, and even Twilight Zone, which is sort of in the middle range, was getting 42 million people a week watching it. And so He-Man, the audience was huge. And so that's another factor too.
Would you say this started that whole trend of toy-driven shows? Because that became huge.
I worked for Mattel, and I also worked for Hasbro on these tours. And toy companies are rotten. They're greedy and they're rotten, you know. We hope to be someday have animation writing put into the Writers Guild.
Yes.
That is a battle that's gone on for it's sold all over the world. And you guys, the actors, the SAG actors, you SAG actors, right?
Pardon?
Yeah, you get, don't you get residuals from cartoons? You don't?
I haven't had a residual He-Man since 1989.
We've never had one, ever, and won't.
All of this is showing all over the world, and it's had so many companies that have owned it. I mean, Lou sold out to Westinghouse, sold out to Nestle, sold out to somebody else. They can't track it. Nobody's paid anything. They're all putting it in their pockets. Yeah, it's criminal.
Right there.
Melendy, you'll never know how much your portrayal of She-Ra meant to a young gay boy in 1985. It meant the world. She-Ra, Catra, Adora, Octavia. How did you do it? It was so perfect.
Oh, thank you so much. I mean, I am thrilled that these characters meant things to people. And, you know, I don't know. I think it was just a darn gift. I really believe that. I love those characters so much, particularly She-Ra and Catra, because Catra never had, thought she had so much power, she had none, none at all. And I'm just very grateful that it affected people's lives. I really am. I love them all. And I particularly love She-Ra because, I mean, you know what she had? She had a little bit of wit about her. And so she wasn't this, I mean, you think of a princess, which is kind of, and then power, like that. But she was almost, she kind of had a bit of humor about the whole thing because to me, her power was so great that she didn't have to really just put it all out there. It was like, okay, well, here we go, So I'm happy to enjoy it. Really am.
And I don't know if this was Lou's vision at the beginning, but when Dungeons and Dragons first came out, there wasn't even a female character. It was called Fighting Man instead of Fighter. It wasn't designed for women to play. And eventually they found out that like 40% of the people that played it were women, because that's just how life is. So with this, She-Ra and Teela and Prince Adam wasn't dating Tila, and there was a real consensus for women. So many young girls watched She-Ra and He-Man. What was the vision? What was the thought behind that? Because no one else was doing that. It was always a sidekick or something.
The thought behind She-Ra was a fight against technology. Because the Horde was from Alien. The He-Man was more of a fantasy show, whereas She-Ra's show was a fantasy show, but it had magic. But it was, this guy is polluting the whole earth. That's why she has to take action. You know?
The feminine characteristics of Mother Earth,
Right.
basically.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And women were more in the 80s, and women was moving ahead. We were all moving ahead. That's why I started putting more people of color in scripts. I said, let's make this guy black. Let's make this guy, Chinese or whatever. You could do it in a fantasy show, but you wouldn't do it unless you called for it in the script. You had to call for it. Otherwise, there was another white guy. I mean, the She-Ra and He-Man thing looked like the Aryan Nation.
I was thinking about that. I would like the writer, one of the writers on staff named Bob Forward, wrote one script once just about Queen Marlena. Because he said of all the people in the He-Man, lexicon, Queen Marlena was like the most sort of underused character. She was just kind of there next to King Randor. So they wrote an entire episode just about her, that she was actually from planet Earth and she was an astronaut who crashed on Eternia, and made a whole story about her, which was really, really nicely done script.
Time for a couple more, right there.
Hi. Sadly, Linda Gary is no longer with us. I would love to hear how each of you remember